Bench Opinions. Three idiots with amateur analysis.
Welcome to another episode of Bench Opinions, ladies and gentlemen. I'm joined, as usual, by my co-podcast colleagues, Dominic Neal, Klaus Schulte, and Max von Heider. We should be going by second names, but you don't have one.
Are we revealing our surnames, eh?
Yeah, but they don't know how it's spelled. We prefer to do this all anonymously.
My banking pin is...
You know what Maxi's nickname was in high school or at school?
Well, like two people called me this.
Heidi.
Frank and Knight.
I think it's hilarious.
I don't... Why?
Heider.
Heider.
Oh, God. It's so bad. It's beneath me. Kidding.
We are currently traveling, which means that the episode we're releasing today is not about current affairs. The Springboks will have played Italy again. The Lions will have played. A lot of other people would have played. France versus New Zealand. Argentina versus England. We will not be talking about any of that this week.
South Africa obviously won on the weekend. It was a great game. Guys really showed up.
We could do an episode and just purely fucking guess what happened. Yeah. And
so Marnie's kicking struggled again. I think it's due to the technique.
To reality. No, what we want to talk about this week is sort of club rugby. I guess it could be looked at internationally. Ownership of clubs, financial well-being of clubs, and where club rugby needs to go in future to ensure it grows, keeps gaining eyeballs, and stays financially viable. This all comes about because we saw the news that Red Bull has acquired or will acquire the Newcastle Falcons in the Premiership. Obviously, this comes on the back of a few clubs over the last few years, few big clubs in England filing for bankruptcy and sort of having to go into administration. Wasps being one of them. Looking at you to name me another, but you're not. Did Bristol go? No.
Wasn't there a team Wolves? Something Wolves? Doesn't matter.
So, first of all, just hearing the news, Red Bull are getting into rugby. Positive or negative?
Overall positive. I think with debates like this, there's always so many perspectives, and I think overall a positive. Right. And the reason I say this is because I think I can understand fan concern when it comes to things like this, particularly fan concern in the sense that there is a danger that they fundamentally change the sport and
the identity
and the things that people hold dear, which is usually bound to culture, history, etc., which often means a lack of innovation and development and change that is probably needed in this modern time. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
Klaus?
Yeah, the replacements are going to come skydiving onto the pitch. Guys are going to skate around on skateboards. Nah, I mean, Red Bull is such a big name in extreme sports, and now also in sports such as Formula 1, but also in football or soccer, whichever country you're from, however you'd like to call it. So they do have a skill at marketing and making teams just absolutely enormous. So that part of it is exciting, right? We're always talking about growing the sport, and that's a company that knows how to grow sports and bring eyeballs to it. So that whole part of it is exciting. But the can of worms that it opens, and this is what the whole topic of today's podcast is going to be, and what you're going to lead us through is, what does that mean for club rugby in the future? How's it going to develop? What kind of worms is it going to open?
Yeah. Yes. I don't have to lead us through it on my own. You can obviously assist me.
You're the host, bro.
Let's quickly, folks, stay on the Red Bull topic because that's the one we have right now. Red Bull, like you both mentioned, they do have a history of success in sort of bringing in eyeballs, bringing in money, and bringing in sort of high performance training and sort of tightening the ship in that regard.
I think but the one thing you have to say as well, and you can just see this by looking at their football teams. Make no mistake, they're running a business.
Yes.
And they are not prepared, and yet they've not yet shown a willingness to put everything on the line to succeed on pitch.
We're going to get to the whole profits versus success as we go through this. Red Bull have now acquired a club, where will this leave the rest of the Premiership clubs? Some do better than others. I think club rugby, and I'll be gladly corrected if I'm wrong, was individual owners owned individual clubs, and depending on the wealth of that owner, the wealth of the club sort of went along with it. The big problem in England that they have is that viewership numbers, TV deals aren't high enough, and that's sort of the money that was shared in the as we used to call it, the football pyramid, wasn't shared well enough, and not enough money came in, which has now left owners sort of taking their own money out and leaving clubs high and dry. If someone like Red Bull comes in, as they do, that immediately lets them bypass 5 or 6 teams that may be still struggling.
I think it's important to look at the unique proposition that rugby presents in terms of an investment opportunity. And I think that's something maybe to look at. And I think it's no secret that investment is something quite new to rugby, also in South Africa, for example, with an American investment in the Sharks. But I think it's important maybe to look and break that down. I think the things that make rugby attractive is it would surprise a lot of particularly non-rugby viewers how high rugby ranks in terms of global viewership. It is comfortably in the top 10 in terms of global viewership as a sport. B, you don't have the stranglehold, for example, that you see in cricket on the sport, with the 3 unions, India, Australia, and England, sort of really controlling the game, therefore making sort of outside penetration more difficult. And 4, the game is driven the game is driven a lot by the international format, which means there is an ability to grow the game on a national level, to compete internationally, and I think that's quite attractive to investors as well. I compare it to NFL trying to break into the European market now, for example, which they're trying to do more and more. The sport isn't played outside of the franchise model, whereas rugby is different, and you're able to penetrate sort of into communities, get people aspiring to play for their national side, and then becoming professional rugby players, which is a bit harder in something like NFL. So I think that combination of things makes rugby something that has a lot of growth potential for investors, but has a good base off which to build.
The international aspect is really important, and I'd like to pick up on that maybe a little bit later on in the conversation. But in terms of... No, it fits better later. I've got it chronologically mapped out in my mind. But all jokes aside, in terms of like looking at Red Bull and Newcastle, and then seeing like what the progression of that is going to be like for the rest of the Premiership, because if nobody else joins the party and starts investing into other clubs, then it's just going to become a one-horse race, right?
Yes.
That's kind of the fear. If you look at something, if you look at the nation who is pretty much put proof in the pudding, you have to look at France, right? So it was in the early 2000s where some rich French dude was like, "Oh, I really want to invest in a football club, and I want to get them to win. Was it Ligue 1 or what's something like that, right? Yes. To win that and like make money off of that." And he made the realization, way too expensive. Yeah. Way too expensive. You got to invest way too much. It's way too competitive. It's just, your bang for buck is not. You're not going to get it back, most probably.
Yeah.
So he looked at rugby and he was like, oh wow, well rugby's got like it's such an open market, and there's so much potential for growth. And so this is the guy who started investing in Toulon.
It's too long.
50-50.
I think it was too long.
It's too long. It's too long.
Started investing in Toulon, right? And very quickly, other investors sort of saw like, oh shit, well this guy is making strides in the top 14. I don't know if it was called the top 14 back then, but it's called the top 14 now at least. And they started sort of jumping in and started investing in their own teams, right? And then you had your La Rochelle and your Toulouse, and they all started getting massive investments, and they all started performing at a very, very high level. And you look at the top 14 now, and you look at the French national team, and Dominic and I had a deep dive on like what's the best rugby nation in a holistic sense, and we both came to the conclusion that you can't take France out of that equation. Like they are right at the top, and they're leading in most aspects. The international thing is then a little bit of a worry for me.
Well, yeah, I think it's a good carryover, because once you give club owners the sort of responsibility to save a club, or to look after the financial well-being of a club, and they bring their own money in, that is now their investment, and that's something that they're going to want to protect. And that's what we see play out in the French league, where they say, this is our season, this is our product, these are our players, these are our clubs, and we're going to protect them over everything else, meaning that players don't get released to play for their national teams, and it doesn't matter what comes when. You play your club rugby first, and because you're our asset. It also touches on what you mentioned at the beginning, is you have to look at it as an investment. It doesn't make sense to just look at it as a passion project, because it is a lot of money that goes into it. Is it dangerous to go down that direction? Because currently, international rugby is what is the top 10 most watched in the world. Club rugby isn't. In football terms, it's the other way around. Other than the FIFA World Cup, it's club rugby or club football which is so popular. Does that dynamic have to change, and is it at risk of changing if you get big investment into club rugby?
I suppose so. I think the drivers are key here as well. I think television is a big part of it. I think how realistic is it that there are going to be people watching the French league across the globe, which means they're able to sell TV deals large scale. Hard to imagine it being like the Premier League, that have managed to package this thing and really just penetrate every single market because of that. So it's unique in that sense. And I think because of that, I think there will always be this interplay between sort of international rugby or this fight between international and pro club rugby as to what gets the more attention. And I think we've already seen it play out domestically in France about what is seen as more important, which type of rugby is given priority, and this battle between the commercial element, which is the clubs in France, and the national element, which leads to them not sending their top players to play New Zealand away.
Yeah.
And I think that's unique to rugby, and I struggle to see that going away, at least in the short to medium term.
Yeah.
Because I do think world rugby is still quite powerful in that sense, and it's going to take a long time, I think, to get other countries to the point where the Pro 14 is.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about Red Bull entering the fray is that I think Red Bull come in with a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the fact that Red Bull have done their due diligence, looked at someone like the Newcastle Falcons and gone, yeah, we're getting into this game, doesn't really open the floodgates into investment in a league like the English league. Yeah. And I think in this case as well, we spoke about, I think you'll see the English rugby union really celebrate it. And try and push it, because they obviously want to compete. They want their clubs competing and against the French as well, and they probably want to stop that dominance.
Yeah. One could say that to solve the international club thing quite easily, if the world got on one agreed rugby calendar, you wouldn't have these issues where club and international rugby was really interfering, and you don't have that at international sense. So it's sort of commonly accepted that when there's friendlies and internationals.
Well, you do have international windows. Like, we're currently in an international window, and the French clubs have played up until the end of that window.
Yeah.
But because of the way that their schedule is timed, the only time the players can take a break is now during the international window. So the French have, not the French, but the French teams, the French franchises have gone and sort of almost commanded all of the time of their players for themselves.
Right.
I think the reason that we don't see the top 14 viewed across the world is it's broadcast in French.
Yeah.
I've tried watching it. It's highly frustrating when you don't know what the ref is saying and you don't know what the commentators are saying. And the other thing that I think for now has limited the fact that not more people are watching it is at the beginning of the top 14, when all these heavy investments started rolling in, they started buying up all the best players in the world. You know, your Johnny Wilkinsons, your Bucky Sporters. I mean, half South African, fraternity went over there. Bucky Sporters, Jean de Villiers, Chesn Colby, Brian Abana. The list goes on and on. Osturant, I thought also played there for a little bit.
Could be, yeah.
Johnny Wilkinson from England. And then, so a lot of people were watching because you had all of these superstars in one team, and it was a very exciting league. The French rugby union then decided, look, we need to have a certain amount of JIF qualified players playing every week, or at least on in the test match squad. So there was like certain ways of how you qualify as a JIF player. You either had to come through the academy, or you had to live in France for a certain amount of years, and yada yada yada. That's now limited how many international stars are playing in France. But what the French unions have now started doing is I think it's Clermont, has opened an academy in Fiji. So now they're training Fijian players in Fiji in their union. So they qualify for playing for as a JIF qualified.
You've got to be creative, man.
It's very creative.
Yeah.
But my point is that they're going to be drawing more and more players from Fiji over to the French league and then command all their time there. My problem is, right, so currently we've got the situation of, we spoke about this 100 times, but sending over a B-string side to New Zealand, not taking the test match too seriously in the sense of like, we're not going to send our best players. If people then start going, well, we're not going to play against the French, we're just going to play against other teams, the French national squad is going to suffer because they're just not going to get exposure to any good sides, right? They'll have to go and play like tier 2 nations. Or what will happen is everybody will kind of go like, okay, well, nobody's sending their best squads anymore. So it loses in excitement. Nobody wants to go watch. I don't want to go watch the Springboks B side. Never mind the B side of another team.
I mean, France's B team is still very competitive, so it's not.
It's got nothing to do with the competitiveness. I'm not saying that they're not competitive, and it's still a massive contest. I mean, we saw it on the weekend, or the previous weekend at least. That France has still pushed New Zealand all the way to the edge. It's not to say that they're not good players, but they're not the superstars you want to see. When Portugal comes over, you want to see Ronaldo. You want to see a Messi. When
Portugal
Argentina
rugby
comes.
team, I was like, I can't name one of them.
No. I'm talking about the football team, of course. So that takes away from its credibility as a test match squad.
I think you've highlighted now also the weakness maybe in the sense, or not the weakness, the maybe thing that makes this whole investment thing not that exciting is that you'd actually maybe prefer, and this is something where people criticize World Rugby, is that the top 15 nations on an international level in rugby haven't really changed all too much over the last, since when was the first World Cup in 87, right?
Since records began.
Yeah, well, in 87, I would say, it was the first World Cup. You have the same, let's say you have the same 20 sides that are sort of occupied that top 15 at any time. And unfortunately, this investment isn't happening maybe where a rugby lover would like to see it happen initially. And that is to grow the game outside of these sort of core nations. Would be one of the questions. My question marks as well, because I think.
But that wouldn't be on private investment to do that. That would be on World Rugby to ensure that investment takes place.
Sure, but I think what I'm saying is
there's no benefit for Red Bull to buy a Portuguese rugby club.
No, but we're talking about the general idea of investment.
Yeah.
And if we think it's good for rugby and we think it's a good idea or not, and I argue that it's not because of this very point. Because what is the point of the direct investment and the large investment in French rugby, which is celebrated now because of the quality that it's creating and how exciting it is and the players that it's attracting, if what we get is a French academy in one of the smaller rugby nations that's often excited us, essentially taking their best players and trying to get them to qualify to become JIF players, and possibly, because I'm telling you this is what's going to happen, the next step is going to be these players choosing to play their rugby for France instead of Fiji. And that's my concern here. And I think that's the most extreme element of it, sure. And maybe this is not as applicable to the Red Bull Falcons case, but if you're looking at investment in rugby, and if it leads to the point where there are these teams that have so much money and so many resources that they're able to go into lesser rugby regions and essentially ingest them, I don't know if that's good for the game of rugby.
Yeah. I think it's sort of, as soon as you bring money into the equation, problems like this come up. Whenever money comes in, you've got also a disparity of who's got what money. There's clubs in France who've got a lot more money than other clubs in France. And it's not a league where every there's 10 different winners. It's very sort of dominant with the very wealthy. But is it a train that we can stop at this point? Because wherever you look, club rugby is struggling. in South Africa, other than the Sharks, all the unions complain that they don't have enough money. Australian unions are terrified that they're not going to bring enough people to the games anymore because people are playing rugby league and Aussie rules. I think New Zealand's club rugby is still relatively healthy. They've managed to keep the small amount of fans that they have on club rugby quite loyal. But then if you look in Europe, you know, the URC has breathed new life into some of the smaller nations. England is massively struggling. So is it something that you can even prevent at this point? Or is it sort of you getting in bed with the devil by bringing money into the game, and you know, by the football example, all the disgusting things that will happen once money comes into the game, but you can't stop it anymore because it's needed.
Look, we're playing devil's advocate. I mean, I don't think any of us are sitting here going, "Oh, we don't think there should be more money in rugby," and especially at the end of the day, we don't think that rugby players should be earning less. They need to be earning more. These guys are literally breaking their bodies to play this game and entertain us. And then they need to go and find a new job once they retire because they haven't earned enough. So definitely we need more money in it, and it's just a question of like how is it regulated so that it doesn't destroy everything that we value, right? And currently, as you said, the main thing on everybody's calendar is like the international window. Like everybody is excited about how does your nation like pair up against the next one, right? But if that dynamic changes, then I guess it's also going to be a thing that like the fans will have to buy into.
Yeah. And I think an interesting example of investment, and I would say disproportionate almost investment in club rugby is Japan, for example, because the players earn in a lot of money. Our South African guys are being paid massive amounts of money. And I would argue all that's really done is grown the sport in Japan, which is, I would say, the most positive side. Of course, it's not foreign investment. There's a lot of, it's all homegrown investment from very rich families and companies in Japan that love the game of rugby. But I think that would be sort of, if that's something you could do, is an ideal scenario to kind of grow rugby where the investment's happening, then I think Japan's a great example.
What about the Bundesliga as a structure?
So the way to get money into rugby is by getting eyeballs to watch rugby. It's TV deals that will bring money to rugby. To get people to watch your league, you will need to have the best players.
Yeah.
To get the best players at this point in time, because France exists and because Japan exists, you have to pay more wages. So it's almost like what comes first, chicken or the egg.
I come back to my point about growing the game outside of the established territories, is that I question where these extra eyeballs have to come from. If the interest in rugby globally is not grown, because surely your ceiling is very low. You know, if you're going, I can see why from a purely financial point of view, right? Red Bull might be looking at someone like the Newcastle Falcons and being like, because Red Bull, for example, you know, not all the money is the same. Not all investors are the same. I think Red Bull are very much an investor that look at something and go, we can do this more efficiently, we can do this at a higher level of performance, and we can run this organization in a way that it becomes more profitable. And we teeter between this line of success on the pitch and branding and creating this entity that churns money out. So I think in that sense, they can probably, without changing any of the rugby environment in the UK, still probably turn a profit from the Newcastle Falcons. I would argue, just purely based off that. But my question is, if you're looking at even more investment into these, is that's going to be a question mark at some point? Is where are these eyeballs coming from? Because it's not. You know, it's finite. It's within England, for example, particularly with the context of there's rugby league in England that is extremely popular. You've got football that is extremely popular. You have cricket, okay, albeit a summer sport, so the clash is not there. But that's why that's my question mark around this whole investment.
This is why we need the Beijing Bulls and the Shanghai Sharks to stop performing.
So if you look at it in that way, and then you say, okay, now let's say there's a current rugby viewing public. And now they have to fight for, every league has to fight for that share. Because I think if we're starting to look for new eyeballs, it's tough to predict where those might come from if it's not the US and if it's not opening up established markets. Are we in a sort of scenario where you need to be the second league behind, let's say France's top 14 is the IPL. They were the first ones to introduce massive amount of money into T20, create a product that everyone in the world watched. By now, there's a T20 league with a lot of money in everywhere. Everyone's got one. How quick do you have to be now as a country to make your league that positive, to try and get viewership from around the world to watch your game? Does South Africa need to be like, okay, we need to offer our clubs like almost like a pig to slaughter and be like, please buy our club, invest in our club, so that people will watch the URC or will watch South African rugby?
I think you can learn a lot from the way the Premier League did it. And we did an episode on this. And the URC need to be looking at this and going, how do we make us as a competition more attractive? And I think that's how you build it, and the people come. And I think that's going to be the real arm wrestle that happens here, because there's already an arm wrestle happening. We saw the English enter the fold when it came to URC, all of a sudden being like, oh, we actually like what you're doing here. Let's try and enter this fold. And I think that's going to be the core. And the URC they have to put their heads together and go, how do we create a product that as many people as possible find interesting, and go from there. And I think the URC is very, very well set up to do that because of the diversity of all the different countries, there being a club interest as well as a national interest within the constellation of the competition. And it'll be interesting to see how they push that. And I think that'll be the core, and that what makes it quite exciting. Then I think once the URC is established and the URC at a URC level is able to really, really, really nail down bigger TV contracts, then I think you'll start seeing clubs start to be taken over and ingested, because they know that the big pie that is the URC becomes more attractive. And this is where I see big problems if this is the way global rugby is going for the likes of New Zealand and Australia, that have kind of been pushed to the side a little bit with Super Rugby.
They pushed themselves to the side.
Yeah, but I was being nice.
Yeah,
that's going to start a comment war.
But genuinely, because I think the power of Super Rugby was the product.
Yeah,
and that product has literally been diminished.
I 100% agree with everything that Dominic said. And
saw by you vigorously nodding. Yeah,
yes.
I was going to dislocate his neck.
Gave him fucking whiplash here.
There's two things that come straight to my mind. I mean, there's probably a plethora of things that would benefit the URC in terms of making a more entertaining, more interesting product. But two things that come to my mind when looking at the top 14 and what makes that so exciting is, first and foremost, smaller stadiums. We don't need the Lions to be playing in Ellis Park. We don't even need Leinster to be playing in the Aviva Stadium. It's too big. Get smaller stadiums, fill those things out, get the vibe and the crowds going. That already makes the TV product more exciting. And so that's point number one. And for us as Lions supporters, it saves our franchise a shit ton of money, because we're currently trying to perform with an anchor strapped around our ankles. The second thing is promotion relegation.
Right.
Every game needs to count. You want to see Zebra slugging it out against, who was at the bottom?
Black
Dragons.
Lion, or eventually maybe at the end of the season in a playoff against the Black Lions from Georgia or whatever.
So you want to have all the cheetahs or the
Pumas.
Problem is,
Pumas bring the EP Kings
they
back.
play in a second league then?
Yeah, that's what I would think.
But that league will get no eyeballs.
I think you'd be surprised, because there is still like a strong support for club rugby, right?
Yeah.
So those guys might not get TV deals, but they will get other benefits that would then have to feed through URC and then go down, and sort of the cash flow would have to feed down to them as well. But that would make every game way more important and way more exciting. So those were the two things that I would suggest. Maybe the league thing is a more difficult fix, but the stadiums I would think is a bit more of an easier fix.
Can move the Lions to Saints, play at their school ground.
Yeah, I said it a couple of times. Either go to Wits or go to UJ and just play it there.
Yeah. I think we could go on this discussion for hours and hours. We don't know where the future of rugby will be. Money will be in it for sure. And
I hope money is in it, because
Red Bull's
that is
taking the
needed.
first step.
When it starts getting really interesting is if we start getting
Saudi money.
non-profit based reliant money. And we've seen it in basketball in Europe now with the EuroLeague. The Abu Dhabi have entered and Dubai have entered the fold. In terms of at least trying to sort of, they now want to have a team in the league and have sort of sponsored the league, and that then opens. You spoke about a can of, well, that's a different can of worms, and I think it's somewhere I don't think we're quite in danger of getting yet, but it would completely tip global rugby on its head, because if you have a team that doesn't actually have to turn a profit to be able to survive, it's a game changer, and we've seen it in football.
Yeah. Let us know what you think. It's a contentious topic. Obviously, the more you discuss and the more you argue, sometimes you fall on either side of it because you find different viewpoints interesting or convince yourself of one or the other side. Let us know in the comments what you think. We'll be back next week with our regular episode schedule, talking about current events. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do so. And thanks for watching.
Cheers. Have a good week.
Gracias.